What's up guys, it's Matt B, and this video is in cooperation with Roadrunner Sports. And in a nutshell, I am going to be giving you the stats and the features on 3 of Garmin's Forerunner watches. We have the Garmin Forerunner 55, the Garmin Forerunner 265, and the Garmin Forerunner 965. Now ultimately these watches fall into different price points, and you won't be surprised to know that the features follow the price points. So the higher the price, the more features you get. I will be making a case for each one of these watches, and I think you're going to be surprised at what you get in each watch. Okay, let's get into it. Okay, I have all 3 watches right here, and let's get started off with price. But before we do, you should know that I will be providing links to each of these watches in the show notes below, and I will be linking a couple other watches that I don't have in hand because I'm going to mention them, and I think those other watches may be right for some of you also. Now let's get started off with the Garmin Forerunner 55. This is the least expensive watch that we're going to be talking about today, and at Roadrunner Sports this will cost you $170. And guys, I gotta tell you, I think this is probably the best value out there. For $170 at everything you get, it certainly is a very good deal. But moving right along to the middle priced option, we have the Garmin Forerunner 265, and that will cost you $450. And then the top of the line, the highest Garmin Forerunner that they make is the Garmin Forerunner 965, and that will cost you $600. So $170, $450, $600. So of course price is something that gets us in the door, but then we want to start knowing about the features, and I think we want to know about battery life, and we definitely want to hear about accuracy, the things that these watch measures, and are they actually accurate. So starting off with the Garmin Forerunner 55, this will last you up to 2 weeks in smartwatch mode. So that isn't using any GPS. The GPS generally is a big data suck, but if you didn't use any GPS, it will last you up to 2 weeks. With GPS, it will last you 20 hours. So realistically, you could go out for a 20-hour run, and the Garmin Forerunner 55 will last you the entire time. Now it gets a little more complicated with the other watches. So next up is the Garmin Forerunner 265. And because the Garmin 265 and 965 have a few more features, there are a lot of options. In smartwatch mode, the Garmin 265 will last you up to 13 days. And in GPS only mode, this will also last you up to 20 hours of GPS tracking activity. Now once we get to the Garmin 265, we do get into a dual band GPS chipset. And because of that chipset, the Garmin 265 has the potential to join onto 2 GPS satellite signals at the same time. And that potentially is going to make it track more accurate than a single band GPS watch like the Forerunner 55. But it doesn't just end there. Although we can connect to all satellite systems all the time, that isn't always the best option to have. Garmin now has their Sat IQ feature. And basically that's an automated feature. The watch will decide when it needs to draw a signal from different satellites, and it will only draw those signals when needed. So if you only need to draw from one satellite, it will, but if you are, let's say, running around buildings or in a mountainous region and it will benefit from those dual satellites, it will only switch to it then. And in that mode, in the automated Sat IQ mode, you'll get up to 16 hours of GPS activity. And just so you know, during all my testing, I have had the Forerunner 265 and 965 set in Sat IQ mode. So I'll let the watches decide which satellites they want to pull from. Now, while we're talking about the 265, this is a good point to bring up that the 265 and the 965 do have offline music support. And basically it allows you to move your music onto the watch so you can run and listen to music without bringing your phone with you. Both the 265 and the 965 work with Spotify, Amazon Music, and Deezer. So if you subscribe to any of those music platforms, you can take your music, move it onto the watch, and then you're good to go on the run. But when you do that and you stream music from your watch to your wireless headphones, that does have a big hit on battery life. So if I were to listen to music for the entire time and I had the 265 set to Sat IQ mode where it chooses the satellites, I will be able to run and track my data and listen to music for 6.5 hours. Okay, get that? We went from 16 hours just running and tracking our data to 6.5 hours if we're listening to music at the same time. Now, if we step up to the Forerunner 965, we get up to 23 days in smartwatch mode. If we have the 965 in GPS only, so the same settings as the Forerunner 55, we will get up to 31 hours of GPS tracking time. And if we use the Sat IQ mode, the GPS tracking time goes down to 22 hours, which is still fantastic. And if we use the Sat IQ mode and we listen to music, we can do that for 9.5 hours on the Forerunner 965. And if you're wondering how much music you can put onto the 265 and the 965, the 265 has 8 gigabytes of storage, the 965 has 32 gigabytes of storage. Now there's a reason that the 965 has so much more storage, but we'll get into that a bit later. Okay, all 3 watches have the same charging port. It's Garmin's proprietary charging port, except now the Garmin 265 and 965 are coming with a USB-C end, whereas the Garmin Forerunner 55 comes with a USB-A end. Okay, that's price, that's battery life. I think those are 2 of the the main things that people look at when they're buying a new watch. Now let's talk about some of the aesthetic features. How big are they? What are they made of? What do they look like on my wrist? And we'll start with the Garmin Forerunner 55. The Garmin Forerunner 55 has 42 by 42 by 11.6, and actually 11.6 is quite thin. I'm going to hold it up, but this is what it looks like on my 165mm wrist, and this is what it looks like on my wife's 135mm wrist. Unsurprisingly, the screen size goes up as the cost goes up. The Garmin Forerunner 265 measures 46.1 by 46.1, and we have 12.1mm in thickness, and this is what it looks like on my 165mm wrist, and this is what it looks like on my wife's 135mm wrist. The Garmin Forerunner 965 gets a little bigger still, and it measures 47.2mm by 47.2mm by 13.2mm, and this is what it looks like on my 165mm wrist and my wife's 135mm wrist. Now, those previous measurements were the case size. When we talk about the screen size, the Garmin Forerunner 55 has a 1.04 inch display, the Garmin Forerunner 265 has a 1.3 inch display, and the Garmin Forerunner 965 has a 1.4 inch display. The Garmin Forerunner 55 weighs in at 37 grams, the Forerunner 265 weighs in at 47 grams, and the 965 weighs in at 53 grams. The Forerunner 55 has a 20mm industry standard removable band. The Garmin Forerunner 265 has a 22mm industry standard removable band. And when I say removable band, I mean quick release bands, because the 965, although it does have removable bands, they don't have quick release bands, so you will need a tool to remove the bands if you want to switch them out. And if you're interested, the 965 also has an industry standard 22mm band size. Now, as far as the lens material goes, the Forerunner 55 uses a chemically strengthened glass, the Forerunner 265 uses Corning Gorilla Glass 3, and the Garmin 965 uses Corning Gorilla Glass 3 DX. And the best way I can describe these changes in the lens material is that they get stronger as the price goes up. Now, none of these watches are using sapphire glass, which is the hardest lens that you can get on a watch, but all three lenses are going to stand up to some punishment. Like, they're going to take some bangs against some surfaces. Hopefully you don't scratch them. I haven't scratched any of them yet, and I tend to just bump into things all the time. Now let's talk about, I think, the biggest difference between at least two of these watches, and that is the display itself. The Garmin Forerunner 55 is using a memory in pixel display. It has 208 by 208 pixels, and a memory in pixel display is kind of like the typical display that we've seen in most GPS watches up to today. Now, both the Garmin 265 and the 965 are using an AMOLED display, which makes it beautifully bright, and the Garmin Forerunner 265 has 416 by 416 pixels, and the 965 has 454 by 454 pixels. And just that huge jump up in pixels and the AMOLED display just makes all the icons nice and crisp, and it really pops off the screen at you. Now, a memory in pixel display is perfect when you're out in the sunlight. You can read it well inside too, but it really stands out in the sunlight. The AMOLED display is, I think, objectively more beautiful. It's just brighter. I mean, it's just stunning to look at. But historically, where that would fall short is when it's in bright sunlight. But the AMOLED display on both the 265 and the 965, they are so bright that I haven't struggled at all seeing the screens in bright sunlight. So let's briefly talk about a few other options that you may have that I don't have right in front of me here. Now, although the Forerunner 55 and 965, they only come in that one size, the Garmin Forerunner 265 actually comes in two sizes. The size that I have here is the regular size, and then it also comes in small. So it would be the Forerunner 265S, and it is the same price, $450, available at Roadrunner Sports, again, link in the show notes, but it's made for a smaller wrist. The 265S has a 1.1 inch display, 360 by 360 pixels. It's 8 grams lighter than the regular version. The case size is about 5mm smaller, although the thickness remains the same. And the best thing about the smaller version of the 265 is that the battery life is better. 265S gets 15 days in smartwatch mode compared with 13 days in the regular size, and the battery life for GPS tracking is 24 hours in the small version compared to 20 in the regular version. So if you do have a smaller wrist, consider getting the 265 small. The AMOLED screen on the 265 small is just as beautiful, just as bright as the regular version. Now let's briefly talk about the smart features of these watches, but I think, generally speaking, these are not smartwatches. They do have smart features, but I just want you to keep that in mind. These are predominantly sports watches that can do smart things. So the Garmin Forerunner 55 connects via Bluetooth, so when you're done with an activity, you will connect it to the Garmin Connect app, and that will upload your data. The Garmin Forerunner 265 and 965 connect via Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. So if you put your home's Wi-Fi into your watch, your activity will automatically upload the second you walk in the door. That's pretty handy. All three watches receive notifications, they have a calendar, you can get your weather forecasts, you can control the music on your smartphone, and you can find your phone. On the Forerunner 265 and 965, you can actually connect to the Garmin IQ store from the watch. One of my favorite features is the morning report, and basically the morning report comes out every morning on your wrist, and it tells you how you slept, how you've recovered, it will tell you the weather, and it will give you a motivational saying. It's pretty nice. I've enjoyed checking that every morning. Now, the Garmin Forerunner 55 uses the Elevate heart rate sensor. The Garmin Forerunner 265 and 965 both use the Elevate V4 sensor, and I'm sure that you have already figured out that the Garmin Elevate V4 sensor is more advanced than the regular Elevate sensor in the 55. So yes, at least on paper, it's going to be a lot more accurate with detecting your heart rate, and we're going to run into some samples in just a second. But the Forerunner 265 and 965 also track your blood oxygen, so it does have a pulse oxygen sensor built in. Both the Forerunners 265 and 965 also have a barometric altimeter, a compass, a gyroscope, a thermometer, and an ambient light sensor. Okay, let's talk about some activity profiles, because that is why you're going to be buying a Forerunner watch. You want to track your activity. Obviously, you want to track running, and I say obviously. Maybe it's not obvious because these watches do track a lot more activities, but I'd put my money on it that you're probably going to be tracking running at some point or another. All three watches can do that. Now, all three watches can track your runs on the treadmill. They can track them outside. If you're running on an indoor track, all three track that. If you're running on an outdoor track, all three have track mode. Basically, track mode is where you tell the watch which lane you're running in, and after a couple of laps, just to calibrate it, the watch is able to snap in that track workout to make it very precise. It's a big feature, especially on the Garmin Forerunner 55. But the Forerunners 265 and 965 also track trail running and ultra running. And you might be wondering, Matt, running is running. Why does it matter if it tracks trail running, or what does it matter what surface I'm running on? Well, it does. It's a pretty big does, and if you don't run on trails on a regular basis, this probably isn't going to be something to pull you over to the 265 or the 965, but when you're running on the trails, the watch takes into account that you're probably not running at the same paces and effort level that you would be if you were running on a flat road. So perhaps you are jumping over roots and you're running up hills and down hills and through rivers and whatnot. But on the 265 and 965, that takes that into account, that your effort is going to be higher working at a slower pace. And it will also give you a VO2 max based on the trails, but more of it won't ding your road fitness because you've gone for a run on the trail. So let's say I'm going for a run on the trail, I'm using the Forerunner 55 and it's set in road mode. My heart rate could be peaking, but I could be running very slow just because trail conditions don't allow me to run any faster. It's going to take that run into account for my general fitness, even though it's not a good reflection of that. And then we've got a lot of biking features that are included on the 265 and the 965, where the Forerunner 55 just has regular cycling or indoor cycling. It gets a little more nuanced on both the 265 and then a little more nuanced on the 965. And these nuances are not something that everyone's going to use all the time. For example, there is an e-bike setting. So if you just wanted to track your commute on your e-bike without really pedaling, the watch will track that and it will give it that label. Now, the big difference between the three watches is when it comes to swimming. The Garmin Forerunner 55 will only track pool swimming, but the Forerunner 55 does a very good job of that. It will detect what stroke you're using, it will log drills, it will give you a rest timer, it will give you time and distance alerts, and the heart rate on all three watches will work underwater. The only downside to the Forerunner 55 is that it doesn't track open water swimming. The 265 and 965 do. And this is a particular big deal if you compete in triathlon. Now, both the 265 and the 965 are going to have a triathlon mode, which if you compete in triathlon, this is an absolute must-have. Now, of course, you could use the Garmin Forerunner 55 in a triathlon, but you won't be able to track your swim, and then you would just have to record a bike portion of your event and then a run portion. But on the 265 and 965, you set up the activity as a triathlon, so you're going to be able to time the swim, T1, the bike, T2, and then onto the run. The 265 and 965 also track a plethora of other activities, far too many for me to go into here, but if you did want to track pickleball, snowboarding, volleyball, or ultimate disc, you can do that on the 265 and the 965. Now, a huge feature of the 965 that is only on the 965 is golf. And this is going to be a big deal if you play golf. Now, Garmin does make watches specifically for golf, but all of those features are incorporated in the Forerunner 965. Now, I'm not a golfer, so I haven't tested the golfing features, but I do know that the Garmin Forerunner 965 comes preloaded with 43,000 golf courses. And in each of those 43,000 golf courses, your 965 is going to give you the distance to the front, middle and back of the green. It's going to measure your shot distance. It's going to include hazards and course targets. It's going to give you a view of the green with a manual pin positioning. It pairs with the Garmin Golf app, and it is tournament legal. So if you're a golfer and you want a watch that does more than just track your golf, the 965 is really the only option for you. Now, you can set these widgets with the things that you think you would like to see on a regular basis. I have my race predictor, my training status, my training readiness, my HRV status, the weather, my heart rate, the steps for the day, my sleep, and a few other things. These are the things that I like to look at on a regular basis. Just in comparison, these are what the widgets look like on the Garmin Forerunner 55. If I scroll down, I've got my race predictor right here. Now, if I do press enter and I go into the race predictor, we can see my VO2 max. If I scroll down, these are my predicted race finishing times. Let's get back out of that and scroll down. I've got my week at a glance, my heart rate, the body battery. Oh, and now that we're talking about body battery, this would be a good time to tell you about it. Garmin's body battery is included on all three watches, and basically it gives you a quick snapshot of how your body is responding to your training and your rest. So when you go to sleep at night or you're sitting on the sofa, that's going to add points to your body battery. But when you go out and you do a hard workout, that's going to remove points from your body battery. It's a pretty basic concept, right? But it's a great way to get a snapshot of how your body is responding to your training and whether you got a good night's sleep. And I think that is a fantastic feature to include on the Forerunner 55. Okay, next up I want to show you some training and planning features, and really I want to show you how these work on the Garmin Forerunner 55, because at $170 this watch packs a lot into it. So right now you're seeing the Garmin Connect app, and if I go into training and planning, then let's go to Pace Pro pacing strategies. Let's create one, let's select a course, and these are some courses that I've already got loaded in, and we can see here we've got the Boston Marathon. Let's say I want to run, let's just say because we're here, let's say a 4-hour Boston Marathon. You can see my goal pace is 9:06. Let's go to next. It shows you a preview of the course. Then I'm going to scroll down, and this can be done for any course. It doesn't have to be a race distance. You can load a course onto the Garmin Connect app, and then you can Pace Pro it out and send it to your watch. But you can see right here in the middle we've got the course profile of the Boston Marathon. Then beneath that we've got pacing strategy. So if I move it to the right, it's going to give us a negative split, and you can see that line moving on the course. If I move it to the left, it's going to give me a positive split. Generally speaking, people should be aiming for negative splitting their race. So let me just move this over just a little bit. That seems like a good negative split. And then it gives me the option on how I want to handle the hills. Do I want to take it easier on the hills, or do I want to charge the hills? I think in this case, I want to go a little harder on the hills. So I'm going to move this slider over to the right just a little bit. And then if I scroll down, it's going to give me my splits for the entirety of the Boston Marathon, taking into account the course profile. Okay, that looks pretty good. I'm going to save it. I'm going to press this little button to send it to my watch. It's going to let me send it to any of my watches. I'm going to send it to the Forerunner 55. Then if I open up the Run app, I'm going to press and hold the left middle button, go down to training, scroll down again to pace plans. Here we have the Boston Marathon at 4 hours. You can see that one above. I did it as a test, but we'll open up the 4-hour one. Now on the screen, we can see how I'm going to execute the race. I can scroll through the pacing, but that all looks pretty good. Then I can just press start. It'll give me the option to use the plan, and then I press go, and I'm off to the races. I'm going to finish the Boston Marathon in 4 hours, running a negative split and charging the hills. Now, of course, you can do that on the 265 and the 965, and it will look a little better on those watches just because of the AMOLED display. But I think now would be a good time to bring up that the 965 also has full topographical maps. And this is where the difference between the Forerunner 265 and 965 really shows itself. On the Forerunner 965, we have these beautiful topographical maps, which is going to allow you to see trails and roads and really plan your routes a lot better. There is no excuse for getting lost when you have a complete topographical map on your wrist. And this map shows up when you just go out for a run. You can set it as one of your data screens, or you can overlay a course on it. So the 965 will tell you when there's a turn coming up. It will tell you when you're off course and show you how to get back to the course. It's a pretty fantastic and in-depth feature if you need that depth of feature. Now, the 265 also has mapping, but it's just a breadcrumb map. So you're not going to get any detail. It's just going to be a line on a black screen. However, in my testing, I don't do a lot of trail running. At least I don't do a lot of trail running where I'm ever going to get lost. For my everyday use case scenario, the mapping on the 965 is a little overkill. Now, I have set maps on both the 265 and the 965, and I find that when I'm looking at my data screen, I find even on the 265, when I'm actually running a predetermined course, there is a little red arrow that appears on the top of the watch, or it appears appears wherever it wants you to go, kind of guiding you. And then if you get off course, it would tell you how far you're off course and which way you need to go to get back to the course. So for the average person, if I consider myself an average person, that level of in-depth mapping is not necessarily something I'm going to use every day. But I do like the navigation features, I just perhaps don't like it to the level that the 965 gives me. I can't say I don't like it, I actually love it. But it's like 90% of the features on any GPS watch, it's unlikely that we are going to use them. However, I suppose it's also one of those things that it's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. Okay, now it's time for just a little comparison, because I want to compare the watches and show you, well, how they compare to each other. Because I want you to remember that the Garmin Forerunner 55 is actually a couple of years older than the 265 and the 965. So we've got newer GPS chipsets, we've got the dual frequency chipsets in the 265 and 965, and a single frequency GPS chipset in the 55. Also, the Forerunner 55 is using an older heart rate monitor. Is it worth buying the 265 and 965 for the newer technology? And how does it compare? So on your screen right now is a heart rate graph from a recent run that I did. And if I put the mouse over it, we can see that I am comparing all three Garmin watches, and I'm also using a watch from another brand just so you can see the comparison. And in this run, it looks like that I ran just over 12 miles, and we can see right here and then here, these are 2 points that I actually stopped during the run. And I think from this macro perspective, I think all the heart rates are actually looking pretty good. Right, they're all lining up well enough. But let's just zoom in to this first little stop right here, and we can see we can see the different colors. So we know that there are slight differences in how the watches have recorded the heart rate. Okay, right here we have all three watches are recording incredibly well, and the three Forerunners are in one beat of each other. Let's come up here to this. Let me just see if I can get all four to pop up. Here we go. Again, very close, within one beat of each other. Right here, it might not be quite as good. Okay, it looks like the Forerunner 965 was at 127 beats a minute, whereas the Forerunner 55 was at 132 beats a minute. If we look at these lines on the graph, it looks like the 55 is more in line with what was actually happening. Now, keep in mind, the Elevate V4 heart rate sensor is the same on the Forerunner 965 as it is on the 265. So theoretically, they should be giving me the same data. But because I'm wearing them on different wrists, the potential for discrepancies are certainly there. That's exactly what I wanted to see from this data. And of course, this would be a good time to tell you that optical heart rate sensors on your wrist are not the be-all and end-all of heart rate data, right? It's sometimes very difficult for these sensors to get accurate data from our wrists. Overall, I'm very happy with this. I'm especially happy with the Forerunner 55 in this instance. Now let me scroll up, and I want to zoom in a little bit on this run because I want to see how closely the lines track. Here is the Ringling Bridge, and in this case, I was running on the south side of the bridge. Okay, let's zoom in, and obviously I was running on the path, not the road, and it looks like that all watches are very similar in their track. So if the path is about 4 feet wide, we can see that they're all pretty much sticking fairly close to each other. It does look like the blue track in this case, which is the Forerunner 265, is just a little off. In fact, we can see when I'm running south, it looks like it's way over the water right here, which I don't know, it's a little concerning. But all in all, we got to remember these things are talking to space. I think this is pretty close and pretty accurate. And of course, remember, it is the same GPS chipset in the 265 as it is in the 965. So this could be a matter of which wrist I was wearing the 265 on versus the 965. If I scroll down just a little more, yeah, they are all very close together. They're definitely within a couple of feet of each other. Okay, next up, I want to look at some intervals. This is just the last activity that we're going to look into a little deeper, because this is going to be a great example of how the heart rate monitor responds to my heart rate when it goes up and it comes down. So on your screen right now, we're looking at 400-meter intervals, and we can see that on the whole, most of these heart rates are sticking together. Now, full disclosure, I am using the Garmin Forerunner 55 and 965 in this test, and I'm comparing it to another brand just to see how they all compare together. I wasn't wearing the 265 on this test, but remember, it's the same guts in the 265 and the 965. So I think we'll get started with the elephant in the room, and we can see here this yellow peak. This is the Forerunner 55. We can see that on this, the fourth interval, for some reason, it just spiked way up and then dropped back. It looks like once I had slowed down, once I had stopped running hard. And then on this interval right here, this to me is looking like the Garmin Forerunner 965. It looks like the 965 was recording my pace accurately, but the other watch from the other brand, that was a little late in picking up my pace. And then surprisingly right here, this is going to be the Forerunner 965. Looks like this had another little bump up, which I can't really explain. I wasn't running hard there. That was after I had come down from my final interval. But I think this is a great example of that. All these watches do a pretty good job, but there are times that they do drop the ball, sometimes worse than others. But all in all, I think this is a pretty good representation of how accurate the heart rates are in both the Forerunner 55 and the 965. I did just want to draw your attention to this part of the map, and I think this is a good indication of the different GPS chipsets, because you can see the footpath that I was running on, and the blue line, the 965, is probably the most accurate in this case, and the orange is the Garmin Forerunner 55. Now there is a lot of tree cover in this area, and it looks like the Forerunner 55 is just a little off, probably about 20 feet off of where I was actually running on this footpath. Then if we move it around to here, it looks like it snaps right back in and it becomes a lot more accurate. Again, it looks like the 965 is the most accurate at this point. So I don't want to bore you too much with comparison data. I just wanted to pick out a few of the areas that showed a good comparison of both heart rate and GPS track. Okay, I did have to switch cameras just quickly because the other one ran out of battery, and I wanted to get this out without waiting for the battery to charge. But it should be noticed that on that run when I was crossing the bridge, the Garmin 965 measured 12.14 miles, the Garmin 265 measured 12.15 miles, and the Garmin Forerunner 55 measured 12.16 miles. So even though some of those lines were a little off, in the end, when it came together, all the watches were very similar. They measured about the same distance. On another run when I was using all three watches, the 965 measured 10.5 miles, the Forerunner 265 measured 10.52 miles, and the Forerunner 55 measured 10.54 miles. So again, at least with my experience, all three watches performed extremely well. But of course, if you're running in a mountainous area around tall buildings, you might get a lot of use out of that dual band GPS in the 265 and 965. So guys, I want to hear from you. I want to know which GPS watch you are currently using to track your runs, if you're using one. And if you're not, which of these three would you be likely to pick for yourself? Or even better, which of these three would you be likely to gift to someone special in your life? Because any of these three are going to be a pretty fantastic gift. And although this has been a longer video than usual, I have barely scratched the surface on the features of these watches. And if you have any specific questions, I welcome you to ask them in the comments below. Of course, I encourage you to check out the links in the show notes below. You can check out the Forerunner 55, 265 and 965 at Roadrunner Sports. And with that, it's Matt B. This has been my gift guide, my choice comparison between the Forerunner 55, 265 and 965. Be kind, be happy, run well. I'll see you in a couple of days.